One of the biggest challenges that I've noticed with clients and students who are trying to learn paginated reports is the simple act of trying to set up from and to dates in your reports. You'd think this would be really straightforward, but it's a little bit trickier because of the way that Power Query Designer was built up. So if you've ever been in a situation like Root here, where you validated your query, you try to run the report and it fails, I'm here to bail you out. Hi, I'm Lenore. I should probably introduce myself. I run a company called Data Plumber LLC, and I love paginated reports so you don't have to. Let's go ahead and head to our report. This is where we want things to land ultimately. We've got from and to date. We can hit run. We don't get the dreaded error. We've got some initial values in here. I can go in and change it. And if I hit view report, we don't get any errors. Looking good. How do we get there? Well, let me show you. We'll go ahead and start with the same report just with no parameters. At this stage, we just have 4 columns and a silly title on this report. When I hit run, I don't see anything on top. It's just generating all the data. I wanted to show you that really quickly so you knew that it was still functional. You'll see why in a moment. So here's our dataset properties. If you're choosing to use the query designer, we can click here, and up in this parameter section above, I will go ahead and do the easiest thing, which is to grab date and pull it in. Automatically, the dimension, hierarchy, and operator, in other words, the table, the field, and the way we're going to apply filters or parameters gets populated. Equal will allow me to have just one parameter selection, right? I can't click 2 because there's no way for something to be equal unless we add an or statement or an and statement. Instead, if I use range inclusive, now I have the ability to click both. So if you've ever looked at this and been like, why? Why are there 2 fields here? It's so that we can have ranges. We could set up default values here for the start and end date. I'm going to choose not to do that. And I would add, you do have the ability to make the start date or the end date a filter, something that end users aren't going to touch. I don't see this lot, but you could do it, for example, for a report that's intended to be year to date with a start date constrained to the January 1st of the current year. Here's our output. Everything's still looking the same. We hit OK. It generates a lot more DAX for us. We can go over to the dataset properties and see that we have 2 parameters that have been written. The values haven't populated. That won't happen until I hit OK. I can hit validate the query. Everything is successful. Yay. Hit OK. Everything looks good. But once we hit run, we get a failed to preview report. And you would be forgiven for thinking that this is your fault. This is something that I don't know if we can call it officially a bug, but is a falling short of how that query designer works. Let's go in a little bit deeper and talk about what's going on. If you don't have show hidden data sets checked, and you don't know that every time you create a parameter, a data set gets generated, you may have no idea that you have these additional queries that the query designer wrote for you. Right now, these are doing from date and to date. And someday I will track down someone who knows the history of why this is set up this way. Essentially, we have 4 columns that are being pulled in with parameter values and levels, null being the absence of any output, 1 being the presence of it. I've never used either of these values, but they must be used by someone. So please put a note in the chat if you know what the background is on this. So there are 2 of these that are being written for both the from and to date. And then in here, in our parameter properties, both of these have been correctly defined as data type date time. This is what would allow us to do the date picker thing that we saw before with that lovely calendar view that everyone knows and loves. And you would think this would work. In here, you have the values that are coming from that hidden data set that, again, you wouldn't even know was there. We don't have a default value. But if we go back to main and we look really carefully, what we notice is that we have the dates using date value to convert the from date date output from that parameter into a date. Now, if from date date is already a date and it's trying to accept data type text and convert it into a date, this is not going to work. So if we don't want to rewrite this query, how do we get around that? The fastest way I know of is to ditch both of these hidden data sets because they're not actually adding any value to what we're doing here, and have these values go in as formatted text strings. And the way that I set this up is by just going format to start parentheses. We're just going to put a parentheses around the parameters from, and then we're going to designate the format, year, capital MM for month, DD. And quote and parentheses. We do that for both. We do not copy paste because in my experience, every time I do that, I forget to update them from the from date to the to date, and then I spend way too much time trying to hunt down what the problem is. So I do this separately, format, two parentheses at the beginning, comma, and then same thing, year, up, MM, lowercase dd. Now we have something that the DAX query can feed into the semantic model and it will understand what is going on. We hit OK just to get that satisfying validation successful note. Now that both of these are not going to get used, we can just go ahead and delete them. And then once we finish that, we go to parameter properties. We've got the date time there still. Available values, we have to say none. So it's just going to revert to using the date time logic. And as soon as we use none, that date picker shows up. So all that work for that hidden data set to get written out is actually getting in our way in this situation. Because for us to get that date picker output, it really wants there not to be any values that it's pulling from in a query to populate some list. This is not the only way we can solve this, but this is the fastest one I know of for folks that do not want to get into building out a whole query in DAX, but I will show you that next. Let's go ahead and look at from and to dates, make sure this is working. There we go. Everything's great in here. You can type that in, or we can click and we can select a different date. We'll get slightly different output. Yeah, there we go. Got a working date picker. So if you're in this boat, just remember we've got different steps in the parameter relay race. Go one by one. And I will go ahead and put that format logic in the description of this so you can look at it directly and not have to hunt for it in the video. I hope this helps.